Hello everybody. I would like to welcome you to the second session of our study. If you have not yet watched the first video, I would invite you to go to the website beforetherapture.com. There you will find the link for the first video. You can watch that and then come back to this second one. As you may already know, what we're doing here, we're studying the events that must happen before the rapture, events that the Bible predicts before the rapture of the church. Like with any prophetic study, the task is something akin to putting a puzzle together. And in order to put this prophetic puzzle together, what we are going to first do is to see which one is the final world superpower of the church age. We'll see today that the Bible gives us some very specific pointers to recognize which nation is going to be the most prominent nation as we go into the final days of the church age and further into the tribulation period. However, since I'm mainly directing this study to an American audience, you may want to ask, what about America in their last days? Is America significant as a world power as we go into the final countdown for the church age? And the answer is no. I'm happy to say that the answer is no. And I'm sure you're going to protest. What's the matter? Are you some kind of an anti-American bigot or something? And my answer is no. I love America. That's why I like the fact that America does not figure very prominently in the end days. And I am going to explain to you why. There are two possible reasons for a nation to be prominent in the final days. If you think about it, we have a war going on between God and Satan. So for a nation to be prominent in the final days, it must either be important to Satan's plans, and can America be important to Satan's plans? And I'm sure you realize the answer is no. Satan hates America. God used America to rescue the Jewish people from the persecutions of Europe, Russia. God used America to create the modern state of Israel, and that way to begin the final countdown of the age. God used America like no other nation in order to preach the gospel to the world. And we are sure, we know, Satan hates America. America cannot be important in Satan's plans for the final days. And you're glad for that. Now the second possibility would be a nation would be important if it was important to God's plans. Now, is that a possibility for America? The answer to that is no. If you have studied the Bible and the ways of God for any length of time, then you realize, and if you do not already realize it, you're going to realize it as we go through this study, that God is only going to be glorified in one nation in these last days. It is the nation of Israel. No other nation can be important to God as we move towards the end. Let me put it another way. Since 1948, since the year that Israel became a nation, there have been many wars and many rescues that have happened on behalf of the nation of Israel. And I would like to ask you, who gets the credit for the formation of Israel and for the rescue of Israel in these different wars? Now I say credit, many will say blame, and of course it is America. Everybody looks at America in order to explain how the small nation of Israel can still exist. All of the Muslim nations of the world are so convinced that America is responsible for the survival of Israel that they call America the big Satan while they call Israel the little Satan. This state of affairs simply cannot persist. God will bring about the right situations so that even a blind man will be able to see his interventions on the affairs of Israel. The simple fact is that there is only one nation that God will use in the final days as a nation and not as a separate group of believers, and that is the nation of Israel. God will rescue Israel in such a mighty way, and He's going to do it twice before the rapture of the church, and in these rescues no man on earth will have any excuse to ignore God's hand in the whole thing. The only nations that are not Israel, and they're still significant in the end days, they are the enemies of God. So you see, the best thing for Americans, and any other nation really, that is not called Israel, and their best hope is to be obscure, to be anonymous in the end days. There are some obscure references in the prophecies that may refer to America, but for my part I hope that it is not America they're talking about, because wherever the prophets talk about a nation other than Israel is nothing but trouble. So with all of this in mind, let's go to the Bible and see what it says about the final world superpower. As I said before, I'm going to take the knowledge of the basics of prophecy for granted, and I'm only going to remind you a little bit about the second chapter of Daniel. In that chapter, what is Nebuchadnezzar dreaming an image that has a head and chest of silver, belly and thighs of copper, and legs of iron, and finally the feet and the toes are mixed with clay and iron. The interpretation that Daniel gives is that the head of gold is Babylon, which is supreme between 606 to 536 before Christ. Medo-Persia takes over from 536 to 330 before Christ. Greece, the copper, takes from 330 to, it says here 27, but it's really 31 before Christ. Rome takes over from 31 and runs into 1453 AD. If you remember from history, the western part of the empire was the Roman part, and that ended around the 400s AD, but the eastern part, the Byzantium, stayed around for another 1,000 years until 1453, when it fell to the Ottoman Empire. Then we have the end time, which we're living now, and this is represented here with the feet of clay and iron. Now this is what Nebuchadnezzar sees in the dream, and to Nebuchadnezzar God is showing the glitter and the glamour of the physical world. Starting with chapter 7, God is showing to Daniel the same kind of history, only this time he's showing to him wild beasts that represent these same kingdoms, but they show a more realistic perspective of the spiritual kingdom. Now in chapter 8, again I suggest that you read chapter 8. There you will see that Daniel sees a ram which represents the Medo-Persian Empire, which of course corresponds to the arms and the chest of silver. He also sees a goat which represents the Greek Empire, and in the statue it is the copper part of the statue, and these two animals fight each other, and the goat overcomes the ram. Of course the goat here is an abnormal kind of a goat. It has a horn in the middle of its forehead, and that represents Alexander the Great, who was the leader of the Greek Empire that took over the then known world. As we read in chapter 8, when Alexander the Great died, the kingdom fell into 4 different parts, taken over by the 4 generals who were the leaders of Alexander's army, and after he died they fought over the kingdom and they turned into king. The part which is Macedonia and Greece is taken over by Cassander. The part that is Thrace and this part of Asia Minor is taken over by Lysimachus. The southern part, which includes Egypt and Libya, is taken over by Ptolemy, and all of the rest is taken over by Seleucus. What I would like for you to remember is that these 4 kings did not last for very long, maybe 20-30 years, and they were gone. So we want to go to the 8th chapter of Daniel, the 20th verse, and there we read, "The ram which you saw having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia." You remember the ram that we talked about. "And the male goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king, Alexander the Great. As for that horn being broken, and the 4 that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of that nation, but not with its power." The 4 kings that we talked about that were generals: Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have come to their fullness, a king of bold countenance and understanding riddles shall stand up. Now this is the critical part. In the latter time of their kingdom. Whose kingdom? Of course, the kingdom of the 4 generals. But these 4 generals died. Within 30 years they were gone. As a matter of fact, the kingdom of Lysimachus and Cassander disintegrated very fast. So by the time that Antiochus Epiphanes, the last Seleucid king, comes about, those 2 kingdoms are gone. This kind of wording seems to be very disjointed. And it is disjointed unless you understand a very significant principle that we're going to be dealing a lot with in this study. The principle that I'm talking about is that everything that's seen on earth is only a reflection of what is really happening in the spirit realm. The spirit realm is what is real. The physical realm is what is just an image, is just a reflection of what is happening in the spirit. So when we have 4 kings taking over for Alexander, this is a reflection of 4 spirit beings, 4 principalities that can be referred to as kings, and they are in charge, and they are directing, and they are inspiring, and they are moving everything that is going on the earthly domain. Let me give you an illustration. Let's suppose you are holding a picture of your son in your hand, and you show this picture to a friend and you say, this picture is a picture of my son. He is working and he's living in California. Notice that you have moved seamlessly from talking about the image of your son in the picture, and you have moved to your real son, the flesh and body person that is living in California and working there. This kind of thing is what is happening here. In verse 22, you have the 4 kings taking over, and they're being talked about, but they are the image of what is going on in the spirit realm. Then, in verse 23, the Holy Spirit is in the same way seamlessly moving into talking about the spiritual kings who are in the latter time. When you see this latter time, this is our time. This is the time of the end. And it is no longer talking about the earthly kings who replaced Alexander, but instead it is talking about the 4 kings who are the spirit beings, the spiritual principalities that are in charge of these kingdoms. Now, what has happened in the time in between? It is hard to know. These kings, these spiritual principalities, must have been out of business for one reason or another, because these kingdoms, after falling apart, they no longer were part of history. However, in the latter times, these 4 kings are coming back, and since they are 4 kings that are over Greek kingdoms, it is natural to assume that there will be a comeback of these Greek kingdoms. It wouldn't make any sense that the 4 kings, the 4 spiritual principalities that were over Greece would come back, and they would come back to direct some other kind of nationality. That's not how things work. That's not how things are done in the Bible. This part of Scripture is so direct and so literal that I have been amazed that nobody is picking up on it. Greece is going to come back before the end, and it is going to bring about the Antichrist. It says here, in the latter time of their kingdom, the kingdom of the 4 Greek generals, a kingdom which is going to be in the times of the end. And just to put the icing on the cake in this kind of interpretation, let's keep on reading. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have come to their fullness, a king of bold countenance and understanding riddles shall stand up. Now this is talking about the Antichrist. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy awesomely, and shall prosper and thrive, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his cunning also he shall cause deceit to prosper under his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and without warning shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken by no human hand. Some people might want to say that this is talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, but Antiochus Epiphanes simply does not fit here. Notice that this person is going to stand up against the prince of princes. Prince of princes, this is Jesus that the Antichrist is going to try to fight at the end time. The Antiochus Epiphanes never did that. But he shall be broken by no human hand. This is talking about the Battle of Armageddon. This is where the final confrontation between the Antichrist and Jesus are going to happen, and that is where the Antichrist is going to be broken with no human hand. That did not happen with Antiochus Epiphanes. Of course, I realize that what I'm bringing to you is something that you may have never heard before. It is not anything that has been discussed to have a Greek Antichrist and Greece as a major power in the final days. So I'm going to stay on this subject in the next video, and in the meantime I would invite you to study this chapter. You may want to study chapter 11, and that is going to be a major part of what we're going to be talking about in our next lesson. So for now, thank you again for listening to this study, and God bless.